I'm guessing you've probably heard of trauma. Pretty much everybody has by now, and you can probably even think of some examples. Have you ever heard, though, of little t trauma? It's something that affects tons of people, and many of them don't even realize it. I know I used to be one of those people myself. If you've ever thought to yourself about a past incident, it really wasn't that bad. Why does it still affect me? You are not alone. A lot of smart, capable women ignore or minimize their past because they assume that trauma only counts if it was dramatic or obvious or life altering. They feel confused when their nervous system reacts strongly in everyday situations, or when self doubt or perfectionism or people pleasing or overthinking keep showing up, even though they recognize intellectually that they quote unquote shouldn't be. By the end of today's video, you will understand what little t trauma is, how it can shape your stress response and your self perception over time, and why it can impact both your confidence and your self confidence. Yes, those are two different things if you didn't know, and I will explain more about that later on in the video. You'll also learn how to start moving forward in a practical, skills based way. So, what is trauma? The American Psychological Association defines trauma this way: it's any disturbing experience that results in significant fear, helplessness, dissociation, confusion, or other disruptive feelings that are intense enough to have a long lasting negative effect on a person's attitudes, behavior, or other aspects of their functioning. APA goes on to say that traumatic events include those caused by human behavior as well as by nature, and they often challenge an individual's view of the world as just, safe, and predictable. So here's what that means in everyday terms. Trauma doesn't have to be big or catastrophic to have long lasting negative effects. And we'll get into that a little bit more here shortly. First, though, here are just a few important nuances that I'd like you to keep in mind before we dive into this topic. The idea here is not to self diagnose trauma. This video is designed to help you understand what trauma is and how it can have lasting effects on how you think, feel, and function. As always, the information that's contained in this video is not mental health advice, and I am not a mental health professional. I am a life and trauma and resilience coach. Next, you don't have to decide whether your experience qualifies as trauma before you take its impact seriously. A more useful direction is to notice how a trauma response may be affecting your present day life and then take steps to support yourself through it. Okay, now that we've got those nuances taken care of, let's talk about big T trauma versus little t trauma. You'll often hear people use the terms big T trauma and little t trauma. These two terms are not a way of ranking people's trauma in order of impact to decide who deserves more compassion or more support. That's not the goal at all. Instead, they're categories that can help people like you and I understand the link between our past experiences, our patterns, and the effects that those experiences have. Big T trauma includes those often life altering, significant events that many people tend to think of when they hear the word trauma. Some examples might be things like accidents or natural disasters, physical attacks, and similar events of that kind of a nature. Little t trauma, on the other hand, often involves recurring or ongoing stressors that, while maybe not immediately life threatening, they can still affect your sense of safety and well being over time. It can also impact your sense of self worth, your perception, and your trust in yourself and in others and in the world at large, just like that APA definition of trauma said. Some examples might be bullying over a period of time, or harsh criticism from your parents or other important figures, or ongoing financial stress or instability, or maybe repeated experiences of being embarrassed or dismissed or unsupported. If you're tempted to compare your story to someone else's and tell yourself that it isn't that bad, I want you to consider this. Your nervous system doesn't file experiences away based on how big they look from the outside or what they're like compared to what someone else has been through. Your nervous system learns based on what felt disturbingly threatening, confusing, overwhelming, or unpredictable in the moment. Let's talk about how little t trauma can shape your stress response over time. And really, this is where a lot of people get stuck. Your stress response is your nervous system's protective reaction when it believes that it senses a dangerous threat. Fight, flight, and freeze modes are very common ways that you've probably heard of that your stress response can show up. So, with little t trauma, that learning is often repetitive over time. Your system takes in patterns like how safe it is to be visible or how safe it is to make mistakes, how likely you are to be criticized in a situation, or whether support is available, or whether you have permission to have needs and to ask for them to be met. Then your brain starts scanning the present day situation, looking for possible matches to those past experiences. Here's an important nuance that most people aren't aware of. Trauma response is a biologically correct response based on adaptation in response to past experiences, even though the response today may not be applicable or even desirable in the present day situations. When your brain believes a present day situation resembles a past threat, it can offer the same protective response again. That doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It means that your nervous system learned something and built a pathway around it to protect you. And that protective pathway is still here today. Let's talk about how little t trauma can shape your self perception. So it doesn't only affect what you do, it often shapes how you feel, think, and believe about yourself. Over time, repeated experiences can create internal beliefs like, I'm not safe unless I stay ahead of problems, or I have to be agreeable in order to be loved, or mistakes are costly, or being seen leads to criticism, or my needs create problems. Those beliefs don't just float around in your head, they show up in patterns, especially when you feel pressure. And by the way, you may not even realize that you believe these things because a lot of times these beliefs are formed and are operating on a subconscious level. However, they still 100% can influence the choices, the decisions, and the actions that you choose to take today. Some common patterns are things like overthinking simple decisions or needing reassurance before you trust yourself to make a choice or a decision, or replaying conversations multiple times even to check for mistakes on your part, or perfectionism that feels like constant pressure, or people pleasing to prevent your own discomfort around disappointing other people, or over explaining so that you won't be misunderstood, or even feeling responsible for other people's actions. If you recognize yourself in any of these examples, you are not too sensitive. Your system adapted based on past experiences, and it's still using those adaptations in your life today. This video is focused on how little t trauma can impact your confidence. And I went with the word confidence, frankly, because that's the word that most people use when they're searching for help. However, it's also helpful to distinguish between confidence and self confidence because little t trauma can affect both. And also because many people just don't know what the difference is between the two. Let's start with confidence. Confidence is based on your past. It's built on skills that you've developed, experience that you've gained, and evidence that you've already collected to support your beliefs and your belief in yourself and your ability and your skills. That's why you can feel really confident in one area and super shaky in another, simply because the evidence for each one is different. Self confidence, by contrast, is based on your future. Self confidence is your capacity to trust yourself to navigate whatever comes up. When little t trauma has shaped your stress response or your self perception, it often impacts self confidence first. You might look capable and accomplished on the outside, but you still feel this searing self doubt on the inside because your nervous system doesn't trust what will happen if you get something wrong or you disappoint someone or you fail or you're criticized. Okay, let's talk about some signs that little t trauma might still be impacting your confidence and or your self-confidence today. If you tend to over-prepare because it doesn't feel safe to present work that's imperfect, or if you second-guess decisions and end up polling other people to reinforce and help you feel better about making a decision. Or you avoid being visible, such as speaking up or applying for positions or posting or just being seen in general. Or maybe you have a tendency to dismiss your strengths and accomplishments and focus on what you perceive to be your flaws or your failures. Or maybe you tend to treat feedback as a threat instead of useful information. Or maybe you overexplain to prevent somebody from misunderstanding you. Maybe you even feel responsible for other people's reactions and emotions. Maybe you work hard, you achieve a lot, and you still feel like a fraud inside. You don't have to identify with every one of those examples for this to be relevant. One or two patterns can be enough to create a lot of stress and a lot of holding yourself back in life. Let's talk about how to start moving forward in a practical, skills based way. You don't need a dramatic overhaul, and in fact, trying to create one can feel overwhelming and incredibly stressful. A more approachable plan is to take small steps that build self confidence through gentle repetition. So, step one is to stop debating about whether it counts or not. Your past experiences don't have to be earth shattering to have a real and lasting impact on your functioning and the way that you think and feel about yourself, the way you relate to other people and the world. A lot of people get stuck asking, does this actually count as trauma? And that question often keeps you in analysis mode, overthinking something that ultimately totally misses the mark. It can also lead to minimizing your past experiences, which can actually keep the pattern in place. A more useful direction is this: how might trauma response be impacting my present day functioning? And what support could help me learn how to respond differently over time? So, in other words, it's a lot less important to classify your past experience as, is this trauma or is this not trauma, than it is to recognize how they're impacting your present day functioning and to take steps to move yourself forward in light of what you discover. Next, learn to support yourself during a stress response. If your nervous system is activated, clear thinking and self leadership get really hard to access. And that's true even when you can recognize intellectually in the moment that you should quote unquote know better, or you should be over this, or you should be responding differently. And really, this happens because the thinking part of your brain goes largely offline when you're experiencing stress response and your survival brain kicks in. And this is where nervous system regulation skills help. They give your system a way to shift out of that stress response, that fight, flight, or freeze mode, so that your thinking brain can come back online. Now, if you'd like a deeper dive into some nervous system regulation basics, I'll link a video here on the screen that gives you more information. Step number 3, work to build self-confidence in small increments. Small incremental growth is often the best path toward building self-confidence, especially when there's a history of trauma involved. A lot of people try to force a big leap. I should be over this by now. I just need to figure this out right now. And then the security guard in their brain hits the brakes. By the way, I'll link another video up here that tells you about your security guard. And she does that because your nervous system experiences that big leap that you so much want to take, sees it as unsafe, as a threat. Instead of going for that big leap, focus on recognizing and building your capacity to navigate whatever comes up. One approach that I use with my clients in my Resilient Foundations Trauma and Resilience Coaching Program is called Set Focus Questioning. The goal is to strengthen your awareness of what already works for you, because your strengths can actually be reverse engineered into a personal playbook that can help you navigate situations that come up in your present and future. So here are just a few examples of some asset-focused questions that you can try with yourself. What did I do this week that required courage, even if it was a small little action? Where did I follow through, even if I did it imperfectly? What has helped me recover from hard moments in the past? What's the first step I took to recovering from those hard moments? Which skills do I already have that I can apply in this situation? These kinds of questions can help you build self-confidence one honest and realistic step at a time. Step number 4, choose your next best step. Choose one small, doable step that you can actually follow through on. That might look like making one decision without having to ask other people first, or saying your preference without over-explaining it, or declining a request from someone else without over-apologizing for saying no. or sending that email anyway, even though you can still think of a lot of ways to improve it. Be sure to reflect on that small step that you took from an asset focused perspective. What can you give yourself props for? How can you give yourself honest but gentle feedback in a way that keeps you moving forward instead of shaming you for not showing up perfectly? Sometimes it helps to see examples that look ordinary and common because that's exactly the reason that so many people dismiss their own history because it feels so common and so relatively normal. Here are a few examples of recurring or ongoing stressors that can impact your stress response and your self perception: bullying, exclusion, or social dynamics that trained you to scan for approval or taught you a need to minimize yourself. Chronic criticism that trained you to focus on flaws even when you're doing well. Having to walk on eggshells because other people have unpredictable reactions. Being embarrassed publicly and not receiving support from other people afterward. Even financial stress that trained your body to stay braced for the next problem, or pressure to keep the peace, especially if the conflict felt unsafe, or even pressure to be the responsible one, especially if you had to grow up fast. None of these examples prove anything. They simply illustrate a reality. Repeated experiences can shape how your brain and your nervous system learn to relate to yourself, those around you, and the world at large. That learning influences your brain's playbook. And by the way, you have the capacity to rewrite that playbook using structured processes like the one I described today. In conclusion, trauma doesn't need to be big to be impactful. Little t trauma can shape your stress response and your self perception over time, and that can affect both your confidence and your self confidence. The good news is that skills can be learned, your nervous system can be supported, and self trust can be rebuilt. Self trust is what makes confidence available when you need it. Confidence is a skill, and you have what it takes to build it. If you'd like some support with this work, I'd love to invite you to schedule a free coaching consultation with me. It only takes 30 minutes, and you can leave the call with a clear idea of why you've struggled with confidence for so long, plus some very clear next steps that you can take to start rebuilding your self confidence today. Visit my website at amyshield.com/book to schedule your free consultation today. Thank you so much for checking out my video. I hope you have an amazing day. Bye bye.